I think housing must be seen as a continuum, starting with homelessness, in which we can find ways other than temporary shelter for people, finding SROs in which the homeless can live. I think housing means helping families who are working families to have affordable rental housing. I think we need to look at young families who cannot afford to get into housing and find ways to get them into housing. Now, to do that, we must form a partnership, as I said earlier on, but we must look at various ways. We must look at affordable rental housing as one option. We must look at building units so that young people can afford to buy them. Or we must look at co-op housing, which has always been a very good option for people over the years when the Liberals started it a long time ago in the 60s. We must look at bringing back some of those models. Densifying housing is an important issue. We need to look at the land we have to be able to afford to move land forward. Municipalities have land, they don't have money to build. And so some of the things that we need to do must be about everyone coming to the table, including the federal government. The federal government must lead this initiative and then put to the table what we can afford to bring to the table. I think that the important thing is to look at the whole comprehensiveness of housing and to recognize, and as I said earlier on, that housing is a core human need. You cannot look at having education, you cannot worry about food, you can't do anything if you don't have a secure and safe place to live. The only way we can do this is by creating the partnerships. Now, as you said earlier on, the federal government has many things that you can do. CHC can get back into the mortgage business. We have the RRAP plans in which we can renovate new, old, existing stock. We have the ability to look at land and maybe work with the private sector using our tax incentives, tax credits, removal of the HST, any of those things we can do to get private sector to build. We also know that housing stimulates the economy because when you build residential housing, you create a whole new economy of people building, of all the sub-trades, of all the buying, of retail to furnish houses. So I think it's an important thing for us to focus on housing. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, those in the field have defined it. It's not just our party that's defined it, but we accept that if housing costs amount to more than 30% of the income of a family, that there is a risk around affordability. So up to 30%, it seems that that's been analyzed to be the critical threshold. But we are now seeing in Vancouver, particularly the Lower Mainland, housing costs that approach 50% or even more of household income. And at that point, you're not dealing with an affordable housing situation. I want to differentiate that there are two kinds of affordable housing sort of dilemmas. One is around the affordability of purchasing, and the other is the affordability of renting. And the strategies the Green Party would use differ, of course, according to those. So in terms of affordability in rent, it's incredibly important that we actually intentionally build rental housing. And we've seen a real drop-off in that, and every analyst has pointed to it. When until the 80s, 1980, we had tax break for investors to invest in the building and the maintenance of rental housing, we had rental housing being built. That tax break was removed, it shifted to hotels and condos, that's where the money went, and we would want to see a movement back to that particular tax advantage for investors in building and building and maintenance. In terms of options around purchasing, there has to be a variety of options. And new homes, I mean, we've seen the size of homes come down, the prices go up. There's questions that need to be asked about the investors in those homes, and I mean, we're open to a global market. It's a touchy subject, but I think we need to discuss it.
I mean, affordable housing is important in the context that, you know, as Adrian said, I remember my dad always telling me, he's 69 now, he said when I was growing up, he said, always remember, your house should be 40%. That's principal, interest, and taxes. It shouldn't go above 40%. I think for a lot of people, especially young people, that's a fantasy. We wish that were true. It's just not true. And it's the circumstance that, you know, young people can, which is why you're seeing more multifamily dwellings, more condos, more high-rises, townhouses, as we basically run out of land in the Lower Mainland, and we want to preserve our park space and have the quality of life that we have in the Lower Mainland, that people are going to have to start flexing into that. With regard to affordable housing, the one thing that concerns me most, and so far hasn't been addressed, and I suspect it might have been a fourth question that would have been asked here, is who is hit most by the lack of affordable housing, and what can we do specifically for them? And my answer to this question specifically, I think, is our seniors. I worry most to be honest, about seniors, those who have very fixed incomes, who are aging, who are hit with rising costs of healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and other things, and they're on fixed incomes. And the lack of affordable housing for seniors is something that's, I think, a peak and unique concern here in the Lower Mainland, because it's something that needs to be addressed. And we have a number of projects that we've invested in. I think about the Al Haig Society and a very important housing project that we have in my community. They've been built all across the province, all across the Lower Mainland, is partnering with community groups, the province, municipalities, to make sure that those who are the most vulnerable, that those projects that are coming forward have the support. It's across all levels of government, and that we can get through any kind of bureaucratic and financial hurdles to make sure that the seniors who are, in my judgment, the most vulnerable in the Lower Mainland with fixed incomes, massive increase in the cost of housing, that they are not left behind, that we have programs that are established to support them.
Well, BC has the highest debt individually for people in Canada, and I'm sure that that has a lot to do with the housing crisis and the affordability issue that we have here. I never believed that I would see a day where a house in East Vancouver cost $1 million. You know, East Van was always considered like a good place to go buy your first home. That's gone. I certainly think that the 30% rule is something that we need to try and stick by. That was established by CMHC. And of course we know that there's about 80,000 rented households in Metro Vancouver that are above the 30%, and 31,000 households that are now higher than 50%. So that's very serious. That has huge consequences. In terms of what we can do, I think the bill that I have in Ottawa that's now had 2 votes in Parliament and has been approved by a majority member of Parliament is to set targets and deadlines and real outcomes. I don't think we can approach this as sort of a hit and miss. Is to have a real plan with deadlines, targets, outcomes. We've also introduced motions to have the GST exempt from affordable housing. My colleague Denise Savoie has also had a bill to provide a tax incentive to landlords that would allow them to defer the capital gains tax if they purchase low-cost residential rental property. And I've also moved motions that would index the home buyers plan to inflation. I think those things are examples of what we could do to improve affordability for homeowners or first homeowners as well as for rental. But the most important thing is having a national plan that lays out a course that everybody could be a part of. And I think there's a real interest in Metro Vancouver to do that. Municipalities have generally done an excellent job in this area, but they cannot do it alone. They cannot do it without the federal government, and they can't do it when programs end, you know, as they did just April the 1st, and we don't know if they're going to continue. This is not the way to deal with housing crisis.